This is an announcement of a new reading series. I'm calling it Zarathustra Summer because I'm starting it at the start of summer, and I think it would be kind of good to do it as like a summer reading, because I find when you read in the summer, reading is a bit more active. It kind of motivates you to do more. Winter reading is very much like more in your head, where I think summer reading is more in the body. I've always found that with reading. So I thought there would be no one better to do reading, which is trying to express something embodied, lived, practiced. Nothing better than Nietzsche's Zarathustra, which I've never read in its totality before. I've only read a few sections of here and there. So this is my first thorough front to back reading of it. And I find with Zarathustra, just from the passages I have read and seeing how it's used in different ways by different people, it's definitely something that you need an angle with, I feel. Like it would be kind of pointless and boring to just read every section and just try give you some sort of spark notes summary of what Zarathustra is trying to say. I feel like with this text you need an angle, you need a kind of interpretive mechanism, you need a way to grasp it, which is almost something that you might want to go in with even before you started reading it, which I know a lot of people might say, no, you should just read something openly. But I feel if you've read almost everything else the person has written, which I have with Nietzsche, but this text, it's probably fair enough to sort of get a grasp of like what their overall project and what their overall philosophy is about, and go in with certain presuppositions. So my presupposition would be that Nietzsche's doing something which I believe anyway, Nietzsche's doing throughout most of his work, which is that he's trying to reevaluate the civilizing principle. The civilizing principle in the sense of what makes us human, and how we live together, how we what we strive towards, what we work towards, what we value, and so forth. How this has basically failed. And Nietzsche, obviously writing in the kind of late 19th century, was in the Victorian era. And the Victorian era, I've always thought, was something which expressed, in my opinion, an over-evaluation of domesticity, so how we domesticate ourselves. And which is why I find this text to be good summer reading, because summer is normally when you get outside a bit more. Summer is where you might go on a holiday. Summer is where you might try, I don't know, like quite literally in the case of the cover of Zarathustra, climb a mountain. Summer is often a time where we try look to a extended horizon, we could say. In ancient societies, summer would often be the time where more trade would be done or more warfare would be done, because it's easier to move about when there's no snow and harsher conditions and so forth, and the days are longer. So, i.e. Zarathustra Summer. So the underlying, I think, attempt of Nietzsche to criticize the Christian, the certain excesses. I think I'm not in the camp of blaming Christianity as a whole, but certain excesses within Christianity, which for some reason emerged, and I think Nietzsche would argue was quite stifling and inhibiting the kind of spiritual and hierarchical movement of man towards something greater, i.e. the Übermensch, the Superman. So, Zarathustra, from just, if you kind of know a very general summary of the story and the context of this person who's in isolation coming down into a city and trying to kind of preach a message. So there is a clear attempt in the kind of very general story of the character to withdraw from the community for an extended period of time and then return to the community with a message. And this withdrawal and this return, I think, is kind of the embodiment of the reevaluation. And um, uh, we can also infer, and I mean, this is all explained in the prologue, so I'll get into this next video in more detail. But in general, you can see this 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 period of isolation away from the city, I think, is in some ways a rejection of domesticity, of a refusal to be domesticated on some level. And Nietzsche would often talk about priests as people who run kind of what did he call them? Menageries. I can't remember what text that was in, but that's a kind of old term for somewhere where you beat dogs, where you beat down dogs, and turn them into pets. And this is all over Nietzsche's other texts: taming, degrading, taming. Um, this, in one passage, I think it's in Twilight of the Idols, or maybe it's in the Antichrist. I'm not sure, but he criticizes Darwin, for example, and he says Darwin has this idiotic idea of improvement, and he says that often advancement can mean degeneration, not improvement. So, and obviously, the city, communal life from the classics, is always posited as the highest point of human life and of human achievement and human civilization. And perhaps in antiquity it really was, but in modernity, when Nietzsche was writing, something's gone wrong. And this is, I think, a way I've always interpreted his critique of Christianity, and why his critique of Christianity is still relevant, because we can live in a post-Christian world, and whatever excesses of, compassion or his idea of the ascetic ideal, or ressentiment, or whatever other things that Nietzsche was critiquing about Christianity, can clearly exist in a secular society too. So there's no need to think that this is only historically relevant to a critique of a Christian society, especially considering Nietzsche's society was getting less and less Christian as time went on, and that was probably very clear to him as well. So some of the other kind of themes that I feel, just skimming through some passages in the book and looking at some of the kind of titles to different sections, is going to be something which we can call, and I'm picking this up from Peter Sloterdijk as well, zoological thinking, zoological ontology. So we have this quote, which is in the prologue to Nietzsche's Zarathustra, where he says, and this is probably my favorite quote from Nietzsche in general, he says, man is a rope stretched out. On one side you have animals, and on one side you have gods. And this rope, man is the rope, or is walking over the rope, we could say, and underneath them is the abyss. So this tension between humans, what are we? Are we animals? Are we something more divine? And remember, this is all contextualized by the death of God, which means I suppose a loss of a in hierarchy, a point of spiritual highness. We are in general walking over this tightrope between. We are ontologically, we could say, between animals and something divine. We're not completely divine, and we're not completely animals. So what are we? We're walking on a tightrope. And I think this is a good kind of grounding for kind of Nietzsche's evaluation of human ontology, we could say. And obviously God being dead, I think you could, it's quite clear that the Übermensch sort of comes in as a new point of hierarchy, of a new point of a new identification of highness, of something to strive to. So, another question we could ask that I assume is going to come up in this a lot is, where are humans in this division? Are we for example, are we do we have a disposition which leans more towards one side than the other? Are we naturally animals, but then we have to sort of morally lift ourselves out of that? Are we naturally spiritual, and we have to sort of avoid the degradation of bestiality? What is the kind of status of humans here? How do we falsely, wrongly tame ourselves, civilize ourselves? This is not, by the way, like Nietzsche is not some sort of anarchist or anything. He doesn't think that we just need to revert back to being animals and living in some sort of completely tribal, non-political, non-religious, non-civilized state. My impression of Nietzsche is just that he thinks that we've gotten this terribly wrong over time, and that there's a risk in that. So, in what sense, like, what has gone wrong, and in context of civilizing ourselves, what exactly has gone wrong in the context of the attempt to civilize ourselves? This could also be interpreted as humanizing gone wrong. We're often quick to judge people for using dehumanizing language against others, and we do this of course in a kind of secular humanistic society. But if we talk about angels and divinities, these are not humans. So are we dehumanizing ourselves by saying someone is an angel? I mean, that would seem to be a good dehumanization, right? So it's kind of ambiguous here, right? And of course, I think the important thing, and very much in the theme of Zarathustra Summer, as I was saying before, summer is a bit more of a bit more of an adventurous time of the year. How do we kind of embody this new trajectory, which I think Zarathustra is trying to open up the path for, lead us towards, of a new journey towards this hierarchy, towards the Superman, towards the Übermensch. How do we move in that direction, we could say, through practice and through values and through thinking? So I suppose the path might be opened up to move in this direction within this sort of reevaluation of the civilizing principle itself. We sort of have to criticize what's gone wrong with the civilizing tendencies in order to civilize in a way which doesn't lead to the same problems, which is obviously things like nihilism, things like becoming the last man, things like taming ourselves where we shouldn't be tamed, things like neglecting the body, and so on and so forth, all the things that Nietzsche usually criticizes in most of his texts. So you've got a kind of theoretical and a practical, because this is of course a story, and this is of course the depiction of a man who's withdrawn for 10 years, and he's going back, and this withdrawal and return opens up these massive distinctions. It opens up, it shakes the cobwebs off him, and perhaps the distance he can then see the civilizing tendencies within the towns that he's visiting more clearly. We have a kind of practical and a theoretical task kind of bound together, a kind of embodied, lived praxis and a kind of detached critique, which is kind of, mixing in together. So that's basically just the introduction to the reading series. I'm going to go through different sections. I'm not going to go through every section probably, or in order or one by one. I'm only really going to get the sections, I think, where this specific angle is more clear or offers me something to kind of interpret and play around with. So it's not going to be every single section in the book, but as many sections as it might be every section in the book, depending on how it goes. But that's basically the angle I'm going to be doing this from. So yeah, that's just the introduction. So stay tuned for more of these readings of Zarathustra, and subscribe. Thank you.